Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. My friends, I cannot believe how close we are to SHTF. In the last 24 hours, every single potential battleground, every theater that World War III will be fought in has flared up. We're talking about U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine now officially. And what are they doing? Well, they're doing weapons audits. Seems pretty harmless. They're not taking up arms against the Russians directly, right? Well, where are these troops going to be positioned? They're going to be positioned by the weapons depots. Where does Russia target the most? Weapons depots. The mission creep is real. This is incrementalism at its finest. We're going to war with the Russians. Mark my words, everybody needs to prepare for it. Now, if only that was the biggest news that has come out. We have Saudi Arabia on high alert over intel of an impending Iranian attack. Iranians have attacked Saudi oil fields in the past, and the last thing the global economy needs right now is for two of the biggest producers of oil to be fighting with one another. Right when we're on the brink of real deal diesel shortages here in North America. Things are about to get wild. We're going to talk about that. And if that was the only news of the day, then that might just seem like a normal day in 2022. But we also have the Korean Peninsula getting ready to light up like a Christmas tree. Because what's going on there right now is they are playing host to the biggest war games ever staged since the Korean War. There's been more activity in 2022 on the Korean Peninsula than any time since the Korean War. And guess what? The North Koreans are interpreting this as an invasion plan by the US. We're talking about hundreds of warplanes, warships. We're talking about over 1,600 sorties flown. The North Koreans are on edge. And guys, if there's anybody you don't want on edge with their finger over the nuclear button, it's the North Koreans. They can send an ICBM our way, and it would likely black out a good part of the continental United States with a high-altitude EMP weapon. We have China and the United States also on the brink of war. Many are saying that that's within the next year we're going to see China and the United States engage directly. Everything is just falling apart. Let's go back to this U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine. I mean, we're reaching comical levels of complicity in this thing. Comical levels of covert complicity. Put that on a t-shirt. Comical levels of covert complicity in the current conflict. That's what the U.S. role in this farce of a war is. And it's only a matter of time before the patches on the mercenaries, before people stop, kidding themselves and we just start engaging in the Russians directly. So, according to Brigadier General Jarek Harman, who's on the ground in Ukraine, he's the U.S. Defense Attaché to Kiev, is indicating that monitoring NATO arms deliveries to the country is of great importance because they don't want these weapons going to the black market. They want to make sure that the Ukrainians have a good handle on where this stuff is going, because apparently some of it is backflowing into Europe, which the Europeans aren't too fond of because they're trying to disarm their population, like any good democracy would, right? Now, the U.S. inspected its arms shipments to Ukraine before Russia launched its military operation in February, but it pulled its personnel out of the country just days before it began. But now we're heading back there because, well, World War III. They were concerned that Washington could not trace the weapons that it sent to Ukraine. So they're going to offer security assistance. Well, it's only a matter of time, like I said, before they're going to be in the crosshairs of the Russians. Because the Russians aren't going to not target weapons depots because U.S. inspectors are there, or troops are there. And this, of course, is probably just, the gateway into Ukraine. This is how the mission creep is going to start. We know that one of the newest aircraft carrier fleets is en route to Europe. We have plenty of troops in NATO gearing up for a fight. So, I mean, that fight is about to explode. Dmitry Medvedev made a comment today that every single person on this planet should take note of, and that this is not getting enough attention, and this is why this is either doomed to negotiation or nuclear Armageddon. Pay attention. According to paragraph 19 of the fundamentals of the state policy of the Russian Federation of nuclear deterrence, It reads as follows: aggression against the Russian Federation with the use of conventional weapons when the very existence of the state is in jeopardy is grounds for the use of nuclear weapons to defend themselves. Now, here's what Dmitry Medvedev said today. He said, if Russia does not win, then apparently Ukraine does. The Kiev regime announced Ukraine's goal in the war to retrieve all the territories that previously belonged to Ukraine. In other words, to separate them from Russia. This we take as a threat to the existence of our state, the collapse of today's Russia. Pay very close attention to those last two sentences. He knows what he means when he said that. He used the words existence of our state and collapse of today's Russia precisely in reference to paragraph 19 of the state policy of the Russian Federation with respect to nuclear deterrence. Guys, they are saying that if they lose any of the annexed territories, they're going to use nuclear weapons. That's what they're saying. All the Russia blowers are going to say, no, they never use nuclear weapons. BS. There's a reason why they have one of the biggest nuclear submarine fleets. And I'm not going to go into that all again, but guys, there's a reason why the majority of Russians' budget is geared, or military budget is geared towards nuclear weapons. They will use them if they have to. Even Nouriel Roubini has said now that World War III has effectively already begun. Everything will be split in two. This is the guy who predicted the housing 2008 recession, right? The housing crisis and all the rest. He says that we would be lucky if we got an economic crisis like the 1970s and not a war like the 1940s. He thinks that the current semiconductor war with China is doomed to see the US go to war with China in the not so distant future, and all the world is aligning and being bifurcated into a new bifurcated global world. Now, on the topic of Ukraine, we have Liz Truss iPhone row, in which, according to the Russians, they are saying, and this is huge news, which is why I came out with that video 2 days ago, which said that the Russians are going to declare war on the UK. I kind of revised that a bit yesterday when I said, no, the Russians are going to declare war on NATO, because they view NATO as one thing, and why attack a leg when you can attack the center mass of something? You know, are you going to attack UK? If it's not strategically useful, they're going to attack the center mass. Right now, UK is not the center mass. So anyways, Liz Truss apparently had a message that she sent. This is from the Russians now. We're not taking this as fact. We're just another data point to consider. This is what the Russians are saying. That right after the pressure dropped in Nord Stream, and before it was even news, okay, that the Nord Stream pipelines had blown up, that Liz Truss sent Anthony Blinken a text or a email saying done. Okay, saying done, as if incriminating her as being, of course, complicit in the Nord Stream attacks. Exactly 1 minute after the alarm went off at Gazprom, iCloud recordings of Prime Minister Liz Truss' phone show that she used her iPhone to send a text message to Anthony Blinken, who is the Secretary of State of the U.S. military, or U.S. government, I should say. The message read, done. I mean, that's an act of war, guys. Like, in the eyes of the Russians, that's an act of war. Call me Chicken. I don't give a shit if you call me Chicken Little. You know what? I'm going to get a shirt. I'm going to own it. Call me Chicken Little right now. If you aren't prepping your ass off and you've been watching this channel and you watch every single one of my videos, I don't know. I mean, unless you're like paid disinformants or something, and I don't think I'm that important, so I don't know why people would waste the money. But it seems like the same people are trolling every video, so you're obviously hearing what I'm saying. You're coming back. And if you're not prepping your ass off right now, you will regret it. You will regret it. Mark my words. If you remember one thing that I say, remember this. You will regret it. Putin has said that these are acts of terrorism. The Nord Stream acts are acts of terrorism. This is a $20 billion pipeline, a critical infrastructure that would have provided heat and electricity for the German industry, as well as the rest of Europe, because the price of gas is going to be regional. If the price of gas, if Germany can't get gas and they need it from somewhere else, that's going to raise the prices. It's an obvious act of terrorism. Putin explained, according to them, whether we believe it or not, this is how the Russians are viewing it. Thus, whenever you deem any state a sponsor of terrorism, you are effectively going to war with that country. That's why the United States has been reluctant to call the Russians a state sponsor of terrorism, because they know what that means. That means they're basically a stone's throw away from going a strategic nuclear conflict with the Russians. So I just can't believe the stuff that's going on. Russia has also deployed MiG-31s with hypersonic missiles to the European border with Belarus. Russians' deployment of MiG-31 armed with Kinzhal, NATO nomenclature AS-24 Killjoy missiles to Belarus is drawing the attention of the West. These missiles can travel at Mach 12, can strike targets with pinpoint accuracy, and can fire thousands of kilometers when launched from a MiG-31. They can also be nuclear tipped, I do believe, but don't quote me on that. Not a military man. I easily could have been. Sometimes I regret not going into the military. Maybe I still can. You know, the way our society is aging, they might still let me in for a couple years. I'll see how far I can move up the ranks. Anyways, they're saying that the primary targets of this Kinzhal missile could potentially be the airfields in Europe, including the U.S. Ramstein Air Base, which of course would be like an immediate, that would be an immediate escalation of war between NATO and Russia, which would quickly get nuclear. Strikes on decision-making centers within Ukraine, which is more likely. I can't believe they haven't done that yet, in light of all that has transpired. And strikes on critical rail and road choke points along Ukraine's border with Poland and Romania, thus targeting NATO. Now, let's move on to Saudi Arabia. What's going on in Saudi Arabia? Well, if you didn't know, the Saudis and the Iranians don't particularly like each other historically. Sunnis and Shiites don't get along. The Iranians have been supporting the Houthis, who have been fighting the Saudis through Yemen. And just earlier this year, I believe, and this has happened multiple times, where the Iranians have attacked Saudi oil fields. Now, we're talking about, with all the other stuff that's going on, with the diesel shortage looming in North America, we're talking about two of the biggest oil exporters going to war with one another. We're talking about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, what they're saying is that there could be a potential imminent attack on Saudi Arabia. This doesn't necessarily mean that there is going to be an all-out war declared by the Iranians on Saudi Arabia. That's not what that necessarily means. It could mean that they're going to engage in some kind of terrorist activity, meaning targeting an oil field. Now, of course, the U.S. and the Saudis were at odds with OPEC's cuts in their production. And a lot of people, myself included, have made videos about whether or not the Saudis can even increase their production if they wanted to, or whether they really are, or whether they don't have as much oil as they say, and they're well past peak oil. I believe that their peak output production peaked many years ago. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. This is very concerning because they're saying, this intelligence is that in the next 48 hours, they're going to eventually possibly attack. Now, this is strange to me because I could have sworn just yesterday I read a story about how the Iranians were issuing an olive branch to the Saudis in hopes that they would, come to the negotiating table. But apparently, the flip side is true. And we're talking about the Saudis and the Iranians potentially going to war. Now, of course, you have Israel in there. So you have this huge war right now for the Middle East from these three different parties. You have those of the Judaic faith, you have the Sunnis and the Shiites, and probably several other groups battling it out in Syria. You have ISIS, you have all these groups. And it's just a powder keg that is waiting to explode. And once that happens, guys, in terms of like the price of stuff, I couldn't imagine what the fallout will be economically if a war breaks out in the Middle East in light of everything that is going on right now. It would be catastrophic. In recent weeks, the United States and at least one allied nation have observed indications that Iran is preparing to transfer weapons these are, I believe they're short-range ballistic missiles to Russia in order to support the Ukrainian offensive. So, of course, now the Iranians are firmly aligned with the Russians, which I presume means that the Russians have extended the nuclear umbrella to them. Now, we do see a little bit of a love triangle between the Russians, the Iranians, and the Saudis, because the Russians and the Saudis they're kind of buddies in a way. There was a situation just the other day where Putin put his coat over, I believe it was the United Arab Emirates. It was one of those countries. And in Arabian society, when somebody gives you their coat, that's a very symbolic gesture. That means that you will vow to protect them, as if Putin was extending the nuclear umbrella. So what this stuff with Iran and Saudi is there some sort of game being played with the U.S. that's trying to pit the Saudis against the Iranians to get the Saudis to come to the bargaining table with the U.S. so that they can, they have to increase oil production so they can get more U.S. weapons to defend themselves against the Iranians? I don't know. All I know is that shit's hitting the fan. What else do we got? Oh yeah, Korea. The Korean Peninsula. I threw my notes. So, the U.S. has vowed to protect Asian allies with nuclear weapons. The U.S. will unleash its full arsenal, including nuclear weapons, to protect South Korea and Japan from attack, a top State Department official has said, also blasting Pyongyang for its dangerous and destabilizing weapons test, while vowing ironclad cooperation with allies in Asia. Now, they're saying that the North Koreans are about to do another nuclear test, which in and of itself would kind of be inconsequential at this point. I mean, depending on the way the wind blows, there might be a little bit of a fallout that blows, but it's not like the North Koreans are going to shoot someone with a nuclear missile. They've done many of these tests in the past. The last, I believe, was in 2017 or something like that. And you can't tell me that is the reason for these huge exercises that they're conducting right now with the South Koreans. The biggest exercises the peninsula has ever seen are currently being conducted right now. Now, the North Koreans are interpreting this as an invasion plan. So imagine the errors that could be made in the coming days and weeks ahead with these major military exercises taking place just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the contested territory. What was it called? The line. I can't remember exactly what it's called. But and remember, the South Koreans in the north are still at war officially. There's been a bit of an armistice, but they're still technically at war. They've never declared a peace treaty or anything like that. So it's only a matter of time before that situation flares up. And the most important thing to note is that the North Koreans are interpreting what is happening right now as a plan by the United States to invade the North. The North Koreans, if they have to, will use nuclear weapons. And of course, recall that North Korea is just the front door to China. The back door to China, I guess you could say. And they won't do anything, and this is according to David Pine. He thinks that the North Koreans and the Chinese are like teeth to lips, or whatever the saying, however the saying goes, teeth to gums. I'm bad with my my metaphors, guys. But we know that the North Koreans will have the full support of the Chinese behind them, and they will use nuclear weapons if they have to. They've even threatened Washington, again, directly. I believe they directly threatened Washington. I don't have the notes here, but they said that they would be attacking Washington. So you're talking about a potential high-altitude nuclear weapon detonated over the East Coast, which would black out the entire East Coast. Now, just imagine for a second, a war breaks out in Taiwan. A war breaks out on the Korean Peninsula. a limited nuclear war because the United States just vowed to protect Asian allies with nuclear weapons. You have Russia starting to engage NATO in Ukraine and the Middle East all flaring up at the same time. Plus, you have the ongoing insidious climate chaos ensuing. Waterlogged wheat. We have rice crops failing. We have orange crops compromised by the hurricane. We have California's tomato crops wilting on the vine because they don't have enough water. We have floods, droughts, pestilence. We have bird flu that has reached critical levels in the population. And they're talking about massive culls. The price of eggs has doubled. The price of turkeys this year will reach a record. We have electric car charging in Italy more expensive than gasoline now. I mean, can you see the perfect shitstorm we're in? It's amazing anything is still running right now. Like, I'm amazed I'm at a Tesla charging station. And it's probably the last day I'm going to be able to do it because I'm probably going to park this thing for the winter and utilize the Tundra. Yes, I still do have the good old trusty Toyota Tundra that I'm going to be using in the winter because gas prices have periodically come down, but they're about to skyrocket. Because if any one of the things that we just talked about intensifies, then we're talking market crash. Yeah. Apparently, electric car charging in Italy is more expensive now than gasoline. The price has jumped 161%. It now costs $85 to charge your car, 85 euros compared to 71 to gas up, or with a diesel car, 83. And it was 33 bucks to charge your electric car just last year. That's called hyperinflation, folks. Bolsonaro supporters block roads as we have a replay of, was it 2020? Yeah, I guess it was 2020. We have a replay, an exact spitting image of what we've seen in the United States. Now, I believe that Bolsonaro will likely capitulate. They've already approved the transition process, even though he has not officially handed the torch over to the next guy. But there's protests there. Apparently there's some riots. There's some violence. And this is what you would see as we approach World War III. Many countries will kind of be teetering on the brink of civil war as well. And I cannot imagine what's going to happen in the U.S. this year after the elections. I can't imagine what it's going to be in 2024. What else do we got going on here? I know I had some emails. Oh yeah, these are questionable emails, so take this with a massive grain of salt. Okay, you got your bag of salt ready? All right. According to a fellow Saskatchewan resident, a co-worker of his, so this is like a friend of a friend of a friend type stuff, got a letter in the mail from the Canadian government asking if he would like to volunteer to fight in Ukraine. I'm presuming he's in the militia or something. He has basic military training. Okay, yes he does. I asked him to send me a picture of it and he said he would. So, it's on. Hopefully they don't run out of militias because maybe I'll get drafted. Maybe that's, that would be ironic if I got drafted into World War III. It could happen. I mean, you're going to die somehow. If I had to, I ain't dodging the draft, but yeah, it could happen. It could happen. I don't think it would be much. I mean, what would that war look like? I think it would be one of the shortest fought world wars in history. So even if you did get your draft cards, I don't know if you'd actually be deployed. Now we're going to do a whole video on this next email that I received, indicating somebody's saying here that if we were at DEFCON 2, that we would know, that the government would let us know. Local news stations would be alerted. It would probably cause the public to panic more than likely cause civil unrest, which the Air Force has contingency for. I don't want to go into a lot in the email, but would be glad to talk about this process if you're interested. We're going to break this all down in greater detail. We have the author of the book, Nuclear War Survival Skills, who's going to answer in great detail. We're going to be making a whole series of videos that go into incredible detail about how to survive nuclear SHTF. This is very, very important stuff. He's going to demystify some things, dispel some myths. He's also going to cement some ideas that perhaps, people are doubtful about, whether or not thyrosafe potassium iodide is important. He claims that it is very important when it comes to preparing for these types of things. So stay tuned, guys. We have a lot of information coming on the horizon, and I look forward to bringing it to you. And all of these guests that we bring onto the channel, right now it's always with a sense of urgency. And it's not just on our end, it's on their end as well. They understand that the time is of the essence and we need to get this information out there as soon as possible. Let me know what you guys are seeing in your neck of the woods, and just keep your head on a swivel, because any day now, things could just go from 99, or what would we say, 0 to 100 at this point? Things are already at like 50 at least. Anyways, guys, you take care. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.